All right, hi guys. We're going to do a couple things today, or actually a few things tonight. We're going to kind of combine a couple presentations that I would usually give with someone else, but I am here. So you're going to see me do some live code, and you're going to see my fat fingers, which is going to be fun for you. And we're first going to start off by talking a little bit about kind of responsive web app patterns. You know, kind of the hurdles and challenges we learned while building this thing called Foundation for Apps. Hi, I'm from Zurb. I'm Brandon. Does anyone know Zurb at all? At all in the room? All right, a couple people. All right, yeah, Daniel does. All right, cool. What we like to tell people is we're a T-shaped team of product designers who help grow businesses. But what you guys know is we make these things. We make some products called Foundation. Foundation started, I think, like 3.5 years ago as a front-end framework for building awesomely responsive websites. And from there has grown into a few other things. The thing, this little adorable chubby guy right here that I probably relate to more to him than this guy, but that's okay, is Foundation for Sites. Foundation for Sites is a great framework for building responsive websites. It's not very opinionated, but just opinionated enough to get the point across and lets you style everything you need on your own. About last year, about a year and a half ago, we branched out and created this thing called Ink, which is now being rebranded as Foundation for Email. Has anyone out there ever built a responsive or just an HTML email ever? And like, how many of you just cried and cried and cried? Because tables are the absolute worst. Foundation for Email helps you it's a framework for building those emails more efficiently. So it has a ridiculous table-based grid system and buttons and a lot of crazy, wacky things. And we're doing a lot of neat things in the next month or so that we're going to push out, or probably 2 months or so, that's going to have templating language for it. And it's going to be a really fun extra addition to that framework. We also have a thing we launched about 4 or 5 months ago called Foundation for Apps. It's for building responsive web apps. So we had done websites, we had looked at email, and then we were like, oh, Foundation, or Zurb by itself is mainly a studio. So we do a lot of MVPs for a lot of startups and clients and enterprise that wants to act more like a startup and all that good stuff. And we noticed like, hey, we're building a lot of web apps on kind of this weird little sites framework, and there's a lot of patterns that don't necessarily translate. So we decided to give a shot at creating a whole other thing here. So yeah, we realized we were building web apps on a framework meant for sites. We realized that different projects needed different types of solutions, right? So a website is often kind of a fixed width in the middle there. It has a navigation on the top right. There's probably, if you look at 90% of websites right now, there's probably like a hero image that takes up a big chunk of the top with some really thin Proxima Nova in the middle or whatever. But web apps have these other problems that we're trying to solve. We realized this is kind of what we were doing. We were taking like Foundation, and then we were like piling all this other crap on top of it, right? And we were like, that doesn't look stable. And we were like, maybe we do it this way. And we're like, no, that looks still kind of like crap. And then we were like, well, what if we got this thing? Like, what if we built like a different type of system, something that was more appropriate for handling these larger types of websites? When you get Foundation for Apps, it kind of looks like this, and we eventually hope you make it look something like this, which is really kick-ass. So web apps have different patterns and needs. And so these are kind of an example of probably one of the first types of web app that was ever around. Did anyone have Hotmail growing up at all? Yeah, a couple of you. All right, do you still have your Hotmail address? Does someone want to tell us what their Hotmail address was? No one? It was like cutie patootie 9 to 2, or like anything like that. No one wants to share. It was all horrible. It was like skater buoy. But the email apps have been like kind of the great like way to get into web apps, right? Because it's email. I want that everywhere. I don't necessarily want to have something downloaded on my machine. They're fairly simple, but have some level of complexity. Hotmail was, I think, we were trying to trace it back a couple months ago. I think Hotmail was like the first web app ever created. And so mail apps can kind of be like the pushing that boundary. So people wanted to build things that kind of look like this, or things that are dashboards, or maybe things that look like this. Spotify has an amazing web app. They also have an HTML5 built native app, but Spotify's web app is freaking awesome. Like, I use that over the native app most of the time. I'm like, that's fine. I don't need to open an app. I just open a browser window. So people are experimenting and trying these things again. We kind of, after about 2011, everyone got these little devices, and they were like, these devices are different. You need to download things on them. And we're just like, maybe you don't anymore. Maybe they're good enough. You don't need to do that. People might also want to build stuff like this. This is Asana, if anyone uses it. A lot of complex interactions on there. but an amazing example of a web app. So we looked at a lot of web apps, both native apps and desktop and mobile, and we were like, what are the patterns that are common? No one's doing these responsive web apps yet. People are building desktop web apps or mobile web apps, but very few people out there are building things that can respond the same way that websites do. So kind of here's what we found. We found out first and foremost we needed a new way to lay out apps, right? There needed to be a whole new way to lay these out. The columns and grid systems that we're using for websites get you most of the way there, but there's still a lot of patterns that aren't kind of covered in those experiences. So we realized one of the things we needed was these independent scrolling panels, right? That's something that you're seeing most places in these web apps. And that requires you to take up the whole width and height of a screen and have independently scrolling sections that do different tasks. iPhone apps, it's usually just one giant independently scrolling section in the middle, and then different windows that can kind of slide in from the sides. We noticed we needed something like fixed vertical sections. Is anyone in here like a web dev at all? Or is everyone, or designers or anyone? Yeah, all right, web devs. Fixed positioning things on mobile phones is so sucky, right? It's like the worst thing, you do it and like it lags and like eventually it'll be down here as you're scrolling fast. It'll be like halfway down the page. So what we're trying to solve is how to better create a vertical grid to kind of make these sections happen. Collapsing panels was another one of these patterns that we've started exploring and playing with. So on websites, if I have I think I had a client the other day who was like, we don't really understand this responsive thing. Like, here's what we think it is. We think like the thing on the right like goes under the thing on the left. And I got really indignant for a second. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Well, no, that's like 80% of it, so, like, in all honesty. Like, the thing on the right goes under the thing on the left, and that's like 80% of what responsive web design has become. But with web apps, it's not always a viable option, right? If I have my email app, for an example, and I say my left pane has my mailboxes, my right pane has my messages, and my actual message is on the one on the right, I can't just stack all three of those things together or have like a Scooby-Doo scroll. Like I'll just keep scrolling and then eventually it'll catch and I'll scroll up and then I'll scroll and I'll Scooby-Doo for a while and I'll catch. So there had to be different ways to do that. One of the methods for that was figuring out how to really easily for you guys in a framework create things that are on screen and on screen as siblings kind of on a desktop experience that then get pushed off screen as to panels that can come out and in when necessary. So these are kind of the main grid things we discovered while building Foundation. We also realized we needed to kind of bridge the gap between mobile and desktop components. So mobile has had enough time, I think, in its short lifetime, at least, in the grand scheme of the internet, to kind of develop its own patterns. So things like action sheets and these, like all these things that you're seeing that happen, like all things slide over and do all these things. And so is desktop. Desktop has its own kind of patterns that we find within those. Trying to find ways to merge those things that people haven't really had to do a whole lot of yet. So action sheets is one of the main ones we like to talk about a little. I think iPhone and iPad, like Apple dealt with this 3 years ago when the iPad came out, and they were like, we want people to have the same actions. And we're like, what do you do with this giant thing that slides in from the side? So what might be an action sheet on mobile, we can automatically convert to maybe just a drop-down on desktop without any extra work on your part, just single components that do multiple things. There's several of these within the framework, but these are some of the main ones. Things like in-app notifications might be things that where they're in the top right and I can dismiss them up here. They kind of slide in from the top and can kind of come down and notify me. Those are things that I don't want you to have to do extra work when you're building these responsive web apps. Those should be built into a framework that understands the differences and like the relations between those two things. Flexible nav and menu bars were super huge. You have all this, usually we're seeing a pattern lately where there's just like left nav menu with a lot of these screens, or we're kind of bringing back the vertical nav menu. I remember in like 1998, like that was like the hot thing, where it's like everyone had their nav on the left, and then we were like, no, navs go on the top, and now we're like, well, navs are back on the left, it's fine. And then mobile tends to have this thing where it's like fixed on the bottom and there are these tab bars. So it's finding ways to make components that are flexible enough to do both those things, swap positions, change orientation on different screen sizes. Once again, you don't have to create multiple navs, finding ways to make that happen automatically for you. So I'm going to show you guys a couple little demos of some stuff. I am going to live code for like a slightest bit of a moment, so you guys can watch the tears run down my face as I do that. But we're going to first start off with kind of a basic grid structure. So it's not going to look super impressive right away, but we'll start off with that. When you download a Foundation for Apps project, this is kind of the basic template you get, this emptiness that is filling your life right now. So we have kind of a title bar up there, which is pretty popular for a lot of apps, and then just nothingness kind of in the middle. I want to build maybe a chat app that has, just for the simplicity's sake right now, kind of one panel on the left that would have maybe a navigation or some content that's independently scrolling, one panel on the right with a bunch of content that has some fixed headers and footers as we kind of go through. So I'm going to kind of just build that and kind of talk a little bit about the grid system. We use something called Flexbox for this. Has anyone played with Flexbox a little? If you haven't played with Flexbox, check it out. It is IE10+, which is its only flaw. Also, it's not finalized yet, which is in the spec, which is its other flaw. But Flexbox is like, if someone explained to you if you explained to someone how you thought the internet should be built, that's what Flexbox is. We use floats to build the entirety of the internet right now, right? Floats were never meant to do what we're doing with them. Floats were supposed to float an image to the left and have text wrap around, or float an image to the right and have text wrap around. Before that, we used tables that were never supposed to be used for the way we abused them. We've never had a thing that did the thing we were supposed to do for layout. It's what we're hoping to get from Flexbox. Flexbox isn't perfect, but it does a lot of really neat stuff. Flexbox's main attribute, if you guys aren't familiar with it, is that the more divs I put inside a container that is set to flex, they'll just automatically space themselves out based on as many as I put in. So if I put 2 divs in, they get 50%. If I put 3 divs in, they get 33.333%. It is the way the internet should work. So we're doing a lot of stuff with Flexbox. You also get a horizontal and a vertical axes to play with. So we're going to kind of see some of that stuff happening. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these, the syntax we're going to be using. So first, we built Foundation for Apps on Angular. We're not going to show a bunch of Angular stuff right now. We're going to show the grid. Angular allows us to do things like make SPAs, so make states instead of pages, so things can animate in and slide out, and we can bring new content in. It also lets us use some pretty sweet directives, do some fun stuff. So we don't need to necessarily use divs and classes for everything. Can I shut this?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. It's flashing weird lights at me. All right. No, you're fine. So the first thing you guys are going to notice is rows and columns don't make a whole lot of sense once we talk about the ability to switch horizontal to vertical in a grid. Because if I switch a row to vertical, I don't know what that's called anymore. If I switch like a column to horizontal, I don't know what that's called. So the Foundation for Apps grid has 3 main classes. One that's called the grid frame. The grid frame is just the thing you put once your entire app on the outside. And all that's doing is setting the container of the app to 100% width and 100 VH height. VH being viewport height. Yeah, viewport height. And viewport height is an awesome new thing we got to play around with now, so you can actually, without JavaScript, detect the height of your viewport. And all we're doing with that is making sure that we can play with the entire canvas, because height on the web is very much a second-class citizen. Has anyone ever set something to like every time you got new on the web, you were like height 100%, and then it stayed exactly how tall it was, and you were like, why is the internet the worst? And then you were like, then you solved that problem, and then you were like, how do I center things? And then you cried more. So that's the grid frame. We have 2 other things that are called grid block and grid content. These are kind of analogous to rows and columns and other grid systems, so Foundation for Sites or any other grid systems you guys might be using. And they're kind of analogous. A block is kind of analogous to a row, and a content is kind of analogous to columns. So let's kind of just build some stuff real quick. So I have my grid frame, and I'm going to tell this frame to be vertical. I want it to be vertical because I want the things that I'm about to put in it to stack on top of each other as opposed to next to each other. So I'm going to tell that to be vertical. I have a grid content here, and then I just put like a little title bar in it, which is a component. And then I have another grid content here. And this has a UI view. It has some Angular stuff in it. But for now, I'm just going to kind of ditch that. I'm going to get rid of that there. And I'm also going to change this to a grid block because I want to put more like buildings inside of it. So anytime you want to build, you're going to use a grid block. Inside of that, I'm going to create a grid content because I want to put some content inside, like some text. And I'm going to just put like a whole bunch of text inside this, just for the sake of the demo. Cool. So I'll just go ahead and save that. I'm also going to, next, I'm going to create a grid block.
Is everything you're doing here basically based off Flexbox?
Yes. We give it terminology because Flexbox had like 4 different versions of it, and so we're basically just trying to make sure that Flexbox is understood a little more to an extent. I'm going to create a grid block here, and what I want to do is create 2 sections. But for now, I'm just going to kind of paste this in. I'm going to save, and we're going to see what that does by default. By default, without sizing anything, without doing anything, these 2 pieces take up 50% of the width of the screen. Floats wouldn't do that. Floats would just kind of stack on top of each other. But because Flexbox, they end up taking 50% of that screen. I'm gonna size some of these just for the sake of having some sizes in here. So on this grid content, if anyone uses a 12-column grid, you guys probably all do at this point, or a 16-column grid or something like that, we're gonna add some sizes. So on a large screen, I want this to be 3. And for this one on a large screen, I want this to be 9. So if we kind of save this and go back to looking at it, we can still size this like any other grid we want. And refresh here, and we have our 3 and 9 on independent scrolling panels, right? Cool. And your app should never have this much text in it. This is next, I'm going to build kind of the chat portion of my app. So I'll have kind of the place where my name goes, the place where my actual chats take place, and the place where I would type in my chats. I'm going to set this thing to vertical again, because I want to use a vertical grid for this one. And I'm going to div class grid content. Cool. And I'm going to just put some dummy text in here for right now. Ooh, cap lock, that's nice. Cool. And I'm going to set this thing to do what's called shrink. So by default, Flexbox wants to take up even amounts of space, right? Like we showed a second ago. What shrink does is say, only be as tall as you need to be. Only ever be as tall as the content inside of you. This is going to prevent us from having to use things like fixed position elements, where I have to like give it a height and set it somewhere and then pad the thing underneath. We can tell it just to be as tall as it needs to be within this, so we don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to duplicate this 2 more times here. And I am going to take shrink off that middle one because I want it to take up the remainder of the space. I'm going to take a whole bunch of content here. Just going to plop that in right here. That did not work the way it should have. There we go. And we're just going to paste this in here. Hit that, save. And really quickly, we can see within like just a minute or 2, we can get a pretty nice looking system in which we can get some independently scrolling sections here that we can put our chat window in. We can have our title up here, and we can have our kind of inbox up here, or our chat message up here. So we start looking like Slack or HipChat, and just the layout of this in normal code would take about an hour or 2, maybe. It can be done in about 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to show you guys some more stuff in just a second on this. But remember we talked about earlier, if this was a nav menu and this was a kind of a chat window, we can't just stack them on top of each other. We have to find another pattern to do that. We're going to turn this one into a panel that on small that can collapse off to the side, and I can call it in. So let's take a look up here at our grid content that we had. I'm going to just give this a directive of ZF panel, ZF being Zerb Foundation, and panel being a directive that turns it into a panel on a certain screen. And I'm just going to tell it to be medium grid content, saying on medium your grid content. If you're not, you're a panel. We can head back over here. We can shrink our browser down. We can see that it has left us on small screens. What a bummer, but this is still working the same way that you would expect like an iPhone app to kind of scroll independently from things. But we're going to want to call that panel. So we're going to give this panel an ID, and we're just going to say menu. And we're going to, on this little link right here, give it a toggle class, which is built into Foundation. And we're just going to tell it to toggle menu when we click on it. So if I shrink this down here, and I refresh, and I can have that thing kind of sliding off from the left side really quickly. So that's just, in about 30 seconds, you have that kind of built in natively. I'll show in a minute how you can add different animations into this. You can have different sliding, different hinges and things like that. So that's kind of the basics of how the grid is built. Now this looks really boring and dumb. Let's take a look at maybe another piece that might have a little more detail. I'm just going to bring up something right now. And we're just running npm start so that we can start our server here. And it's going to refresh here with a whole nother look and feel. So this is maybe kind of a little version, a little more styled than the last one we saw. We might have our rooms up here and our people down here. We have our main content section here. We might call this thing Slack if we didn't know any better, but who knows. And we can see if we kind of shrink up our browser that this is an independently scrolling section. We have a button that stays fixed here. And we can, through the wonders of Angular, call in different chat windows. So we can see that kind of chat functionality we were building with our grid earlier, as well as we have our chat box down here. We have a way to create kind of some new modals to create new chats. And we're using these panels here to kind of create some nice account things. So I can get rid of this. I can call different pieces in if I want with some different animations. I'm going to kind of go through and just modify a couple things just to see how easy and quick it is to modify these things. Does anyone use sass out there? Anyone sass? All right, all right. Everyone was so shy about using it. They were like, I don't know, pre-process. What about less? Are there any lesser people in the room? All right, no, that's fine. No, less is cool, yeah. We're going to use some sass stuff, and we're just going to modify some things. So I have a little version of this that an employee or a coworker has mocked up for me. And they've left me some comments, and I'm just going to kind of go through, and we're just going to make some of those adjustments on the fly. Because we all know that when we design in browser a lot of the time, which is nice, sometimes things drastically change. So if we look here and we see that they first and foremost say like, man, I really hate that purple and red. It looks too much like Slack. We're nothing like Slack. So they might not, maybe they don't want that. So we're just going to change the whole color scheme of this app using our sass variables in settings.scss. So I'm going to bring up another window here. I'm going to open up our settings.scss file where we keep all the variables for Foundation for Apps. So every variable, everything that we've ever built, any variable we've ever used in Foundation can be traced back to all the variables that are kept in here. In that, I'm going to go find our primary and secondary color, and I'm going to kind of just change those a little to make them a little less like the purple that we have. So I'm just going to change this to, let's say, like a 5.8, B8, B8, and maybe this one to a 5.7.7, 6.8E. All right. And we can just wait for that to refresh real quick. Nope, not there. There we go. Nice. So we can see that we can change the color scheme of that entire thing that permeates out through the other parts of the app. It permeates through some of these sidebars. It permeates through these modals over here. So really quickly, we can already see like a big change. This might not be beautiful, to be honest. Those are not great color combinations, but that's fine. Next, we can go ahead and take a look at some of the other feedback we might be getting from people. They like these. I think they like these here. For this modal, they said, they like the animation of it just kind of fading in, but they want it to be cooler. One of the big things we notice with all kind of apps out there in the real world right now is animation plays a huge role in kind of telling the story, right? So we created a thing called Motion UI, which is a basic set of CSS animation classes, and we made sure that we permeated them through the entirety of every directive, every component, all the views that we see, so that really easily you can kind of create and use these animations within your application. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we would do some of that stuff. So I'm going to find my index over here where I keep my modal. And we have a couple things that you're going to see. We have a ZF modal, which is just the directive of how we call the modal. So instead of using a class or anything like that, we just automatically, these are directives in Angular work a little bit slightly similar to maybe web components, if you guys have been playing with those at all lately. They're just ways to kind of get some of those things. And we're just going to change that animation. So I'm going to say animation -in equals, and I'm going to tell it to slide in down. And I'm just going to save that. And we can just now really quickly see how that looks if we, I think I have two of these open. There we go. If I refresh that page, oh, maybe that won't work, and I swear to gosh it will. Sorry, guys. And slide in down. Live coding will be the death of me. We will really quickly, sorry about that. Refresh that. Apparently that does not want to work right now. I swear it works, but we'll move on for right now. There's other stuff we can take a look at. So let's move on from that and take a look at some of these other notes people might be leaving us. we can take a look at this little panel down here. So we kind of saw panels can actually come from the top, right, bottom, or left. This one's coming from the bottom, and I think that looks pretty weird. They don't like that down there at all. So let's go ahead and make sure that we can find that panel that's happening. Right now we have a position bottom. We can tell that to be position right. We can kind of refresh that, change our code here, come back over here, and now that panel that was sliding in from the bottom now can slide in from the right over there. Now we need a way to close that panel. I have a close button that I've kind of commented out here, and that uses the same ZF toggle. So everything in Foundation that shows up or goes away all just does pretty much the same thing, right? So from modals to panels to alerts to notifications, those things are all just showing things and hiding things. So you can use ZF-open and an ID to open anything, ZF-close and an ID to close anything, or ZF toggle to open and close something with the same button. So we'll kind of save that, and we'll refresh this screen here. And we can see that now it slides out, and I can get rid of it here. So that looks, they might like that. We might want to try a different animation. Dare I try again after that monstrosity there. But let's try that. We're going to say animation-in. We're going to tell it to hinge in from right. And we're going to save that. And then we're going to duplicate that. We're going to change that to out. Hinge out. And we're going to take a look at how that works. And now we can see that really quickly we can create that hinging animation, which is a nice effect as opposed to maybe that slide animation that's in there. Each one of the motion classes has where it comes from, what it's actually doing. They also have something called motion modifiers, which I really don't want you using these in production. But what you can do is, if you're really quickly just trying to try something out, each one has a fast and a slow function built in. So if you want that animation to slow down, you can tell it to slow down. Each one, or if you want it to go faster, you can have a really quick fast. Each one has different ease functions that you can use as classes. So ease in, out, bounce in, out. So you can experiment with some of those. So motion modifiers are a nice way for prototyping, but please in production, you can write your own mix-ins. Yeah, what up?
Are these based on CSS3 or JavaScript?
These are all CSS animations. So they're pretty performant. We're looking at a lot of stuff right now. We know that some people have been doing some cool stuff by like speeding up JavaScript animations. We still think that CSS is probably faster than most other things. But yeah, everything's done, and it's all actually done with transitions as opposed to keyframe animation, which cuts down on the file size like a ton, which is the nice benefit of that. Sweet. All right. Lastly, I kind of want to just talk a little bit about, has anyone ever used like and written routes in Angular? Yeah, okay, a couple of people. For people who haven't done that, you have to, it's all JS based. You write your routes, which are basically your technical pages right now in Angular. Angular has routes instead of URLs. And it can be a pain if you don't know how JavaScript works. If you're a designer, you're maybe a front-end dev that doesn't use JS, it might be pretty annoying. So we built this thing called Front Router that should be used in prototyping when designers are prototyping their apps. So what Front Router is it is uses front matter, which is those little dashes at the top. If anyone has ever used Jekyll, you've seen kind of things that work for static prototyping. Yeah, Jekyll, for kind of these static site generators. But what this does is it lets us define a name of our URL, or sorry, a name of our route, a URL of our route, an animation in on that route, and an animation out on that route. So without writing a single line of JavaScript, we can create new routes. We can call those routes and have them appear in the view, and we can also change how they're coming in and out. So currently with the app right now, we're seeing a fade in and a fade out, which is OK. But we're just going to change that one more time with some motion stuff. And we're going to tell it to slide in up. All right. And then we're going to, that's my problem. And then we're going to tell it to slide out left. And we're just going to save that. And as we save that, we can also maybe do some things where we change the URL. So my awesome chat window maybe. And that can just change the URL. So this is super handy for designers who want to prototype and then hand it over to their devs. And their devs are like, I don't know what these states are supposed to be. I don't know what animation you want when they come in. I don't know what, and then but they can take this same code. They can take the same views. They can take the same routes, write those, add their own controllers to them, and then create live dynamic data within these things. So if we go and just save up this, take a look and refresh our page. And we can maybe call that, and we can call maybe one of these. So really quickly, we can see that it becomes a lot more dynamic. Now that's pretty obnoxious because I have a bounce effect on that, but just for the sake of having that screen come across. So fades are pretty popular in these things. Slides, hinges, rotates, pretty much anything that you guys see in any of those popular CSS libraries. I think animate.css, Daniel Eden from Dropbox, amazing guy, kind of pioneered some of those CSS animations. Most of those in some way recreated in these types of things. So, and just kind of lastly, we can kind of clean up some of the other stuff. We can take a look at maybe some of the things in settings, and maybe for our modal, we want to change the background color of that overlay for reasons, or there's all these things that we can do really quickly with all our settings that give us entirely different looks as we go. And we can take a look at what this looks like on mobile. We now have our single pane app that has our directives built in. They can leave. We can call in our menu. We can call in our people. We can close this baby. We can also call in our modals down here. And we can cancel that. And we can call in our little hingy guy right here. So really quickly, we can develop these apps, and they can be responsive as opposed to something that might be just working on a phone. So that's what I have to kind of show you guys today. If anyone wants me after, I can go in more detail. I can also explain to you what I did horribly wrong on that modal animation. And yeah, what up? Our breakpoints? Oh man, I could look at settings real quick. So you can change the breakpoints to whatever you want. So in our sass versions, 640, 1000, 1440, and 1920. Yeah, no worries. Depending on your, and by the way, the breakpoints we give you are completely arbitrary as far as like device sizes that work for maybe our thing. Keep track of any device, keep track of your analytics if you have a current app, keep track of analytics that come and adjust those. Because honestly, everyone, based on what they do, if you work in tech, your mobile breakpoints probably start a lot sooner than if you work, my grandparents' phones, which are still like little tiny iPhone 4s or something like that. So just make sure you're doing that. Yeah. Any other questions at all? Happy to answer them? Yeah? All right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Would you be able to share how you?
Okay, so that's, I didn't go over the vertical grid as much because I wasn't sure how much everyone cared about the actual code that went into that. In this case where we're seeing this, right, in a normal situation, in fact, I just had to recreate something we had designed for Foundation for Apps the other day in Foundation for Sites, which was a whole mess of fixed positioning and viewport heights and remcalc, or calc function and everything. But what this is basically doing is I'm using Flexbox, and I'm telling it to be vertical. So that means anything I put in here would automatically get split out 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But what I'm doing is I'm shrinking this one and shrinking this one, meaning they're only as tall as they need to be. And then the rest of the one, Flexbox automatically has take over the extra space. And then I'm making that scroll. Because normally you'd have to fix position this thing up here, fix position this thing down here, and then pad this container the height that you knew that container would be. But then if the height changes for whatever reason, like some jerk opens inspector and then just starts adding more content into it. There we go. And just starts adding more, nope. Oh, you can't do HTML in that. That's fine, we'll just do this. And just adds more and more and more and more and more horrible content, and it's all giant and everything, and this gets bigger for whatever reason. That gets bigger and expands, but the content in the middle stays.
So if we want to use this fix, we should use it the way it's servable. We can't just blindly use it.
So this isn't even position fix. This is just replace. Yeah. But you can. I don't like hate position fix. We just knew that was something that we were struggling with internally.
We all do.
Yeah. In fact, position fix is what makes those panels work too, and those work pretty well because they're not following the screen as you go, so those end up working a little better. But yeah, I mean, on that mobile phone, position fix is what's making all of that possible right there. The main goal behind that was just how do I carve the screen up in ways that we've noticed native desktop apps without having to fix this here and then pad this thing here and have an unknown value for anything else. So a lot of that stuff was things that were pretty difficult to figure out. But to be honest, now one of my coworkers, a guy named Jeff, can pretty much code this grid in about 10 minutes now that we know how it works. So the code behind it isn't insane, but it's pretty nice. Any other questions at all? Sweet. All right, well, if you guys have any more questions, I'm up here. Daniel also works at Zerb. He's one of our marketing guys. You can talk to him. And then also, we have a whole bunch of adorable Yeti stickers and a little Inky sticker. Look at that guy. How cute. So they'll be here, and I think Daniel threw some in the back maybe. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Thanks.